Welcome to the experimental video for the Anion Exchange Chromatography. You will start to pack your column by taking a small piece of cotton wool and pushing it down your column using a glass rod or a metal rod. Either one is fine. Ensure that when you press it down the column that you make a tight, firm fit at the bottom and compress the cotton wool firmly. This will be the base on which you build your column and hence needs to be quite firm. Ensure now that your column tab is closed. Next, you are going to clamp your column to the back of your fume hood. You will use two clamps, one at the bottom and one at the top. Ensure that these clamps are safely secured to one of the rods at the back of your fume hood and that they are nearly perfectly aligned as to ensure that your column is not skewed when you start the packing process. Your column needs to be perfectly aligned, and when I say perfectly, of course, always near perfection, to ensure that that you do not elude at an angle or elude in some sort of weird gradient. Next, you will weigh your Dowix resin. Firstly, you will weigh it in a beaker which will have sufficient volume to later add at least 50 to 100 milliliter of water, preferably less, but more is better, and you will weigh approximately between 15 and 20 grams of Dowix in its chlorine form. Remember, Dowix is a respiratory inhibitor, so do be safe when you are weighing it in the weighing room. We will now form a slurry between distilled water and Dowix resin, which is essentially a suspension of the Dowix resin in water. Use enough water to suspend your Dowix resin that you've just weighed in the water so that it can be transferred from your beaker to your column. Ensure that the Dowix remains in suspension and try not to get too much of the resin on the side of your column, as you will need to flush this with distilled water. If some of the Dowix resin got stuck on the sides of your column, gently rinse your column with the distilled water in your distilled water dispensing bottle as shown in the video, just to ensure you get all the Dowix down the sides. Now open the tap and allow your column to start to drip. This will allow your Dowix resin to settle, and always ensure that the water level, so meaning the clear level on top, is always at least 2 centimeters above the Dowix level, which is the darker level at the bottom. So continuously add distilled water to keep that level as such. We will now load our column with our two isomers, isomer A and isomer B. Take a spatula tip of each and grind them up using a mortar and pestle. If one of your syntheses led to a mixture of products already, you can use that instead to illustrate the separation instead of mixing two isomers and adding them together for the purposes of separating them again. Ensure that you grind them finely and make a nice homogeneous powder from your two isomers. Next, take a small squirt of water, approximately 4 milliliters, and dissolve your two isomers. This should give you a light purple solution. You will then add this to your column. Pour your products into the column at the top and allow your column to settle before moving on to the next step. You will now add a second cotton wool plug using the same glass rod as before. Be careful not to crack your column. Keep your column upright during this process. Work slowly and carefully not to disturb any of the dowels at the bottom. If you disturb your dowels, you will have cracked your column. Quite an appropriate word, because you will literally see a crack forming in the layers of the dowels, which means you will have to repack the column. We're now ready to collect our eluent, which would be a solution of sodium hydroxide. Just something I thought I'd mention. I hope your column is closed and your tap is closed and it's not running while you're collecting anything. Never leave your column unattended. So collect your sodium chloride eluent, and now you're ready to add it at the top. Before you add it at the top, ensure your tap is closed and slowly add the eluent on top. After the eluent is added, you can open the tap to start elution. About 1 drop every 5 to 10 seconds is perfect. As you allow your column to evolve and the eluent to drive through the column, you should start seeing your bands to separate. Specifically, one color will start to separate first and another color will be retained longer in the column. You will need to continually add eluent, since of course it elutes at the bottom of the column, and hence you always, when you're collecting eluent, please close the tap of your column, collect the eluent, return, add it to the column, and then only reopen your tap. This is a continuous process which you will need to monitor. Here we can clearly see our two bands have started to nicely separate. Our brown-orange band has been retained less in the column, and our purple band has been retained more. Hence, we start to collect our first fraction, and we switched over to that beaker to collect fraction 1, which is in principle, we don't know what it is yet. It's just the first fraction we are collecting from our column. Hence, we call it fraction 1. Just to illustrate and to convince you that there is indeed a color difference and that I am not crazy, compare the following two colors. The color that you're seeing here in fraction 1 compared to the clear color of the eluent in our waste beaker. You can clearly see the one is colored slightly with a brown tinge. During the middle part, we collected only the eluent, so hence between the brown band and the purple band there was only eluent eluted, so we switched back to our waste beaker. Now that we're back to our second fraction, which is the purple band, we switch to fraction 2, so hence collecting our purple fraction, which is finally collected, and here we can nicely see the color difference between the two fractions that we have collected from our column. Fraction 1 and fraction 2, and you will make your observations on your day in the lab. They should be similar. In fact, they will be exactly similar, but just in case they aren't, these are what you should expect to see. Finally, all that is left is to clean the column, and we will do this using pressure. So, tilt your column horizontally, connect it to the compressed air, open the tap, as you see there, ensure that you have fastened it, and slightly open it and press out your column. Hereafter, you will of course rinse it with distilled water into your waste beaker and discard of the Dowix waste in the appropriate waste container. At the end of experiment 2, this is what you should be left with: an isomer A, an isomer B, a fraction 1, a fraction 2, and from which you can observe the different colors, and you can make your connections of which structures and which geometrical isomers fit which product. Thank you for watching.